Hello and welcome. I am Steve Clemons, editor-at-large of The Hill. Thank you for joining us for America's Agenda, Infrastructure. This is like one of my favorite topics that just doesn't go away. Our virtual event focusing on how to rebalance America's core assets to rebuild our national infrastructure, an effort that can create recurring returns and support for America's foundational businesses and communities, I should add. I'd like to thank our sponsors, Qualcomm and Maxar, for their support of today's program. Our aging physical infrastructure was a problem before the pandemic. If you recall, the American Society of Civil Engineers had awarded the country a D+ on infrastructure, and in my book, that's a high grade. But with everyone working, learning, and educating from home, there's added pressure on our existing digital infrastructure as well. As voters head to the polls, they're considering the various infrastructure needs of the country, but also yearning for answers on how to bring the economy and jobs back. During the pandemic, supply chains, manufacturing, product continuity, and availability were severely disrupted. Can revitalizing our industries to meet those challenges be a source of jobs to get the economy moving again? And as our reliance on the digital world increases, how can we bring our physical infrastructure into the future and embrace options for increased safety and security by connecting them to smart, data-informed systems? We're going to discuss all of this and much more with some of the smartest minds in the fields of infrastructure and policymaking. But before we get underway, a few housekeeping notes. You can tweet us at the Hill Events, all together, Hill Events, using the hashtag the Hill Infrastructure. We are broadcasting live and we'll be taking your questions throughout the program. If you experience any trouble with the live stream, I'm going to laugh at this. Just refresh the page. That should be a quick fix. Otherwise, write our producers. Even though we haven't seen any significant movement on the infrastructure front in recent years, it's traditionally been an issue that's received bipartisan attention and support on Capitol Hill. My first guest is the chairwoman of the House Subcommittee on Highways and Transit, and she is feeling bullish about innovation in transportation. Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton from Washington, D.C., where I live. Great to see you again, Congresswoman Norton. As I said in my introduction, I love this topic. It, for me, is like the number one kind of policy junkiedom. I would love to see some movement. Am I going to be happy soon, or am I going to be continually frustrated?
Well, you should be happy soon, because what would give our economy more of a kick than an infrastructure bill now? And you can do infrastructure without close quarters. One of the few kinds of work you can do now. Now, we have done our work. The Senate, the House Democrats. The Senate Republicans don't seem to want to spend any more money, even on the coronavirus, and certainly not on this bill. Now, this bill is denominated H.R. 2. That shows the priorities it had for us in the Senate. Every Republican in the House voted against our bill. They were largely opposed to the environmental sections. Yet we are in a time when everyone is focused on climate change, and it would be a fundamental error not to begin to take some steps on environmental issues that the transportation sector, which is the major sector promoting climate issues, if we did not take at least some actions on that issue.
You know, when I think about infrastructure myself and the kinds of things that you and your committee, your subcommittee, are doing, it seems to me that you can bridge communities that haven't been bridged. You can bring in data and data infrastructure more completely into infrastructure. It looks like a lot of America's problems could in fact be addressed in part through smart infrastructure. And I think from hearing you in the past and talking to you in the past, I know you agree. What's holding it up? What are the barriers to really proceeding?
Well, this bill had a major priority. It's denominated H.R. 2. You can't get much bigger priority than that when you consider how many bills come forward. And also consider this, that almost no bills, certainly no major bills, are being passed this year because of the coronavirus. Yet this bill was passed by the House. So there's no question that this bill, which is usually a bipartisan bill, should have a very good chance of passing. Indeed, the Senate has even move the Senate has two committees that
Right.
consider transportation. And one of them is far along on this bill. Nothing could be more bipartisan than transportation and infrastructure. There's just no partisanship to it. I think what's holding it up this year is that Republicans don't want to deal with the environmental issues that climate change raises and that are made inevitable before our very eyes, even as I speak.
You know, one of the folks I've had the privilege of talking to in the past is Anthony Fox. He was Secretary of Transportation during the Obama administration, former mayor of Charlotte, North Carolina, and he convinced me of something I hadn't been aware of, which is that a lot of highways, a lot of infrastructure had actually reinforced racial segregation, had reinforced a lot of the divisions in American society, and that we needed to rewire that. We need to pull it out. How much have you and your committee thought about how we take this moment where there's so much concern about racial injustice, economic inequality, and we're making transportation the core of trying to rewire some of those inequities?
Well, our committee deals with national roads, so that those roads do not nearly as much reflect the racial division you were talking about in our country, because they go across the country along the highway sector. It is true, though, that transportation has been a key to division in our country and where the roads go, but local roads are funded by local jurisdictions. And I think they are mainly responsible for the segregation you're speaking of.
Do you think that when you kind of look at the national highway roads, I mean, this is something that Lyndon Johnson used as a way to do it. When you look at toll roads, when you look at that kind of big question of, you know, one of the questions I have is, as we have fewer and fewer cars that are paying for gas and there are more electric vehicles, et cetera, are we going to be able to find the new funding sources to kind of keep all this going? Say, look out 10, 15 years in a row. Are we going to have to recalibrate how we fund national infrastructure?
Well, we are certainly going to have to recalibrate it even today, and certainly as we use less gas and as we get into autonomous vehicles, we've got to reduce carbon pollution, even if people have doubts. I can't imagine where they come from about climate change. Nobody can have any doubts about carbon pollution or congestion. These autonomous vehicles are the real road to the future. They're going to reduce congestion. They're going to expand mobility. They're going to essentially change the way in which we travel. It's one of the things I am most excited about. And they're going to reduce injuries. The new cars will have automatic emergency braking, for example, on trucks and on school buses. That's the kind of innovation that takes us into in real 21st century era for transportation and infrastructure.
Well, thank you. Well, Congresswoman, we have been taking questions from the audience, and we've got a good one from Howard for you. So, Howard?
What about infrastructure needs for Amtrak, such as the Northeast Corridor between Washington, D.C. and New York City, where, for example, under the city of Baltimore, the tunnel was built in 20 years after the end of the Civil War? And what about the need for new tunneling under the Hudson River? Thank you.
Thank you. And I should note that's Howard Marks, who's the founder of Take Back Our Sidewalks and founder of the Ward 2 Better Government Association. So I think he's a local. But what about Amtrak?
Well, he'll be interested to know that Amtrak is in our HR 2 bill, expanded funding for Amtrak. Amtrak is more important than ever. Amtrak does not contribute to carbon pollution. So we have made that a major emphasis in HR 2.
Well, thank you. Well, Congressman Eleanor Holmes Norton, thank you for spending time with us today and launching our event on infrastructure. We look forward to seeing what happens with HR 2 as things come back together after who knows what next week. I know everyone's very busy, including yourself right now. So thanks so much for joining us today.
Such a pleasure.